Welcome to The Sensualist, where we take on the deeper subjects of life, love, sex, and personal happiness. I'm your host, Freya Norden. Remember to like and subscribe. The topic of tonight's episode is sexual suggestibility. Considered a hypnotist's hypnotist, Gila maintains a full-time practice in Los Osos, California. She's a featured presenter at conferences in various professional and medical organizations, and is the creator of the gallery and the Two Minds technique. She's an honors graduate of HMI College of Hypnotherapy, an IEMT practitioner, and holds a certificate in Advanced Handwriting Analysis. Her passion is helping people improve their relationships and sex through greater understanding of the unconscious motivations that drive us. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Gila to the conversation tonight. Gila, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm really excited because I think your take on relationship and sex is so informative and valuable for having great relationships. But before we get into that, can you share how you got into the subjects of sexuality and relationships to begin with?
Yeah, specifically, it was part of my hypnotherapy training. I am a graduate of the HMI College of Hypnotherapy, and John Kappas is the founder. He's since deceased, but it was his theory of E&P sexual behavior that was foundational in our training, because he believed that if we could understand the unconscious motivations of our relationships, we could make them better. So that's how I initially found out about it. And, you know, quite honestly, I've been with my partner since I was 17. We're in our 50s now, late 50s. And when I was learning this, it's like the light bulbs were going off, like, holy shit, if I had known this, it could have avoided conflict. So it not only was informative for me to work with my clients, but it's really enriched my own relationship.
And by E&P sexuality, you mean emotional and physical?
Yes, emotional and physical, sexual suggestibility, but you could call it personality.
Okay. Yeah, I really think that I think more people should put the effort into learning how to have relationships early on and not wait until they're on the rocks or they're maybe on their second or third marriage to finally decide, okay, I need to learn how to do this and how to actually have a long-term relationship and enjoy it and be a full participant in it. I think it'd be better if we learned that kind of thing when we were younger.
It makes me think of, like, you know, people who get marital counseling or relationship or even like religious counseling before they get married. Sometimes it's a requirement of some religions. And I think, no, you should be teaching sex. You should be teaching pleasure. You should be teaching communication when it comes to these sexual things, because money and sex are the number one thing that couples argue about.
Yeah, they are. Exactly. I've often thought that with my work, that I would love to have some sort of premarital or pre-long-term commitment class or concept, just because there's things that you need to know. And I'm teaching them to people in their 50s and 60s and 70s, and they just have no idea what's a natural progression to happen, and then how you mitigate that or how you manage it, I would say. Like, you can't prevent it, but you can manage what's happening.
Right.
So let's dive right into what is sexual suggestibility and why does it matter?
So sexual suggestibility this is the theory, and like any other theory, you know, there's going to be exceptions, but on the whole, I find this theory to be very, very accurate, especially because I use it with every single client. I've been doing this for over 11 years. And so E&P sexual behavior is it's our unconscious motivations of what drive us to behave a certain way in a relationship. So think of what enhances the relationship and what triggers us. And so the theory is that there are two baseline normals. For lack of a better word, we're going to use the word normal. And they are equal opposites. And so no one is ever 100% emotional. No one is ever 100% physical. We're on a continuum. There's a spectrum. And some people are very, very close to the middle. So emotional or sexuality is people who are generally more head ruled. There's a little bit of a disconnect between their body and what they're thinking. They tend to live in their heads, and then it takes a while for what they're thinking emotionally to translate to what they're feeling physically. This is why we call them emotionals. They feel their emotions very intensely. They tend to ruminate and perseverate, second guess, overthink. And so what'll happen is that this particular type of personality will not know how to connect as easily in a relationship physically because they're living in their head. And they unconsciously fear being dominated or controlled, or losing control of their mind, body, and environment, which is why they live in their head. They're always trying to figure shit
Mm.
out. And so what will happen is that with the physical, which is the opposite, they tend to live in their physical bodies first. And then this translates to an emotion or a feeling. So the emotional, people often get confused and they say, well, I'm really emotional and I express my emotions really easily and effusively. I'm very, I let people know how I feel. And I say, yeah, well, we call emotionals because they're feeling so deeply, they just don't know how to express it. The physicals, on the other hand, they express it physically, they express it verbally, and they use their body to communicate. They need touch, they need eye contact. And for them, their biggest fear is rejection. They're driven by this unconscious fear of rejection. So when I hear like talk about attachment styles and things like this, I'm filtering everything through the lens of ENP. It's just something that I can't help but do anymore. And you can see that it runs true across all sorts of uh, expressions of human behavior. But essentially, there's these two normals. And so we're never, one or the other completely. And the interesting thing is that we have completely different priorities and needs.
So, what's the difference between the emotional and the physical in terms of what their needs are in a relationship, or how their responses would be?
So the needs for the physical, they really feel a sense of inner peace and balance if the relationship is solid, if their sexual needs are being met, if they feel like they're getting enough attention from their partner, if they feel that they're very important to their partner. So the physical really needs to know that they are important to their
I,
partner.
I would guess that it would be pretty easy to make them feel important by paying physical and sensual, especially, attention to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because that's why we call them physicals. They tend to live more sensually. They learned to use their bodies to communicate in the world. So when they were raised, there was generally more physical contact, verbal reassurance, that kind of a thing. And so their needs are just much more physical. They're much more expressive and visual and tactile. Then the emotional, their needs is they have more need for space. They need space to be able to think and to be able to process and to be able to come up with what they want to say. So one of the biggest complaints we hear is like, you just don't talk to me. You never want to sit and talk to me. And often the emotional will say, well, I have a lot of things to say, but you don't let me get a word in edgewise. Or I try to say something and then you tell me that it's wrong, because the physical is going to have an opinion and they're going to tell you what that opinion is. And it's, the emo also has their opinions and things like that, but they express it very differently. So the emo needs more space, they need more time to process. If you have an argument or the physical is going to want to hash it out. I want to deal with this shit now, let's talk it over, and then let's be done. I don't ever want to hear about it again. And then the emo, they're going to avoid conflict at all costs because they fear this loss of control of their space, their voice, their mind or their environment. So they're going to avoid that conflict. And then when they do have it, they're very likely to shut down.
So
Or
funny.
they will or they will have bottled things up to the point where that they do explode and they say something very hurtful to that physical. But what happens is that if you have a disagreement or argument with your partner and you're the physical, just know that your emo is going to need some space. Give them some time to process. Leave the room. Say your piece and leave the room and give them some time to sit with it. And you'll have much better results.
Yeah, I'm just hearing myself and my partner in this one. Exactly.
I
Um,
get this all the time. Clients say, how do you know what's going on in our bedroom, especially when we're talking about sexual stuff? It's like, how
yeah.
do you know that this is what our sex life is? And I'm like, well, this theory is pretty accurate. It's pretty clear.
Is there any difference, or are there any patterns in terms of men and women? Like there being more men that are one and more women that are the other, or is it across the board?
I love this question because one of the things that draws me to this theory and why I love it so much is that it does not take your sexual orientation, it doesn't take your gender identity, it is not considering your genitalia at all.
Hmm.
It is all about how we learned or didn't learn to express ourselves verbally, emotionally, and physically. And the interesting thing is we tend to attract our equal and opposite partner. I see plenty of men who their wives have a higher sex drive. And the men are like, the problem is keeps coming at me. She won't give me my space. She tells me I work too much. This is like the classic, the guy works too much and he buys her jewelry or he takes her out to dinner and he pays for this big, beautiful home and all the cars. And she says, you don't love me. You never tell me you love me. You never tell me I'm beautiful. You don't touch me enough. And he says, what do you mean I don't love you? I do
Mm-hmm.
all of this for you. This is, so this kind of filters into that love language a little bit, like people talk about the 5 love languages. But, when it comes to men, it's not either gender or sex. There are some people who are on the autism spectrum. So they're generally going to be more emotional,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether they're male or female, but across the board, it's a you're either an E or P. It doesn't take your sexuality into consideration.
Can you just explain to our listeners why this is so important? Like, I'm of course, mapping this across, but why is it really important to know your own type and your partner's type if you want to be in a relationship with them?
Well, because I think it can avoid a lot of conflict and it can create the most harmony. Uh, if you're interested in being in a harmonious relationship, let's face it, some people, they like to be the dominant ones in the relationship. They like to run the show and rule the roost. And so they're not going to be somebody who's going to be interested in what motivates their partner, makes their partner happy, because if the dynamic in the relationship is already set, why should they change? But for the rest of us who are, kind and open and want to grow and evolve and bring out the best in our partner and ourselves, what it does is it helps us to understand the unconscious motivations about why we behave the way we do, what triggers us, what sets us off, what arouses us. And when it comes to arousal, oftentimes the physical is always looking for this physical attention and affection, and they don't ever give the emotional time to miss them. So if there's
Yeah.
not enough space between the partners, then how does that emo have space to miss? It's like give me a chance to want you. If you're always here, then I don't have to want you, right? So the idea being that when it comes to creating harmony in the relationship, just understanding what the unconscious motivations are. And the biggest mistake that we can make is assuming that our partner wants or needs or responds the same way we do.
Let's go into that um, wanting more or wanting less, like one person needing more physical attention, one person needing more space in order to even want that physical attention to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if the two, if the emo and the physical are so different and they have different needs, how can they better meet each other's needs if it's not congruent with what their personal desires are? So let's just say I'm emotional, I need space, I don't have any desire because I haven't been given any space to process my thoughts, my feelings, and my partner's feeling neglected and horny
Yeah.
and unimportant and really
Right.
really needs me, and I'm just like, oh, I don't even know if I have it in me. So because I haven't had the space that I need. So how can people work around that? Because I think that's a pretty common problem. At least it is
It
for the
is. It's
clients that
it's
I'm seeing, that dynamic.
absolutely. It's communication. And what I love of it, if you understand E and P theory of behavior, understanding is the first piece. Then you can predict your partner's behavior in any given
Mhm.
situation, and then you can shape it. And so often when I teach this, people say, well, isn't it kind of manipulative? And I say, yes, it is. But think about that word manipulation. In and of itself, the word manipulation is not wrong. When you go to the chiropractor because your spine is out of alignment, it's called a manipulation. It's to set things right. So if we put the relationship, if we want to set, then yes, understand what motivates us and our partner, then we can predict what's going to happen, how things are going to play out, and then we can shape it. So when you talk about the context of what do we do when there's a mismatch of needs and wants, it is the communication. It's the understanding without judgment that though they are different from me, it's natural for them. So I'm going to give you a personal example. When I was learning this because I told you that the physical feels rejected and the emo just needs space, and neither type is better or worse. They're just different. So a classic example of this is I'm in my 30s, my early 30s. I have 2 children. under the age of 5. I'm working 40 hours a week as an executive assistant, manager kind of a thing. And I've got, taking care of the home and all this kind of stuff. And back then I was a little bit more OCD about how everything had to be in my environment. And so I was just having this really, really busy, stressful, terrible week. And I crawl into bed one night, finally get the kids, everything put away. I crawl into bed and I'm laying there and I just let out this big sigh, this, and I feel this hand come across, it's creeping across, it grabs a hold of my breast. And I say to my husband, if one more person needs one more thing from me today, I'm going to lose my fucking shit. And then his hand slowly creeps away back to the other side of the bed. He rolls over, and then I hear him sigh, like,
Oh,
ah. And that is because the physical, to them, sex is a way close. It's a way to really be at our closest with our partner, our most intimate and our most vulnerable. And so they think that sex is the answer to stress. Oftentimes, when the physical is feeling really stressed and horny, that sex is a wonderful release. It's a physical release of all of the pent up tension and frustration and stress of the day. Whereas it's quite opposite for the emo. The emo is feeling so intellectually and physically overloaded. I had already given all my physical I had in the tank to my kids, to managing people, to doing all the shit I had to do. So I was depleted. So that's why I didn't have anything left to give. So this idea, I didn't realize at the time of rejection it was. Here is this man who thought, oh, she needs a good orgasm. That's what she needs. And she's going to feel so much better. And in reality, I probably would have, but we just didn't know how to communicate in a way to allow that to unfold.
that's that example that you just gave is so spot on for, oh my God, almost all of the couples that have that discrepancy in needs and desires that are coming to me for help. And the physical one always says to me, I don't get why she doesn't understand or he doesn't understand. This is the best stress relief out there. Like if she could just tap into having an orgasm, then she would feel better or be less stressed out or whatever. And certainly as I've gotten older, I've noticed I need to relax first. Once I'm relaxed, then I'm happy to jump into physical and erotic play, but I have to actually relax first
Yeah. And
before I can
this
get there.
exactly. And this is the flip, right? Because if we remember that the emotional often has a bit of a disconnect between what they're thinking in their head and what they're feeling in their body, they're often not even aware of how tense they are.
Hmm.
You'll know that emo because they're walking around with their shoulders up to their ears, and you're like, "You're all right, yeah, I'm fine." Well, you don't fucking look fine. What's going on?
Well, also,
Tense. Oh God, you're right. I am tense, right? Where the physical, they're going to come and say, "I've had a shitty day, and I feel like shit," and they're going to tell you.
also with that, with the emo and the nervous, I'm going to call it nervous system activation. If your nervous system is going
Mhm.
haywire, even if you're not aware of it because you're not paying attention to your body physically, but you'll know because there's no sensual or sexual desire. There's no libido. And as soon as you shift into that different space, it's like, ooh, there you are. There's my
Yeah,
horniness. Now it's come back. So I think
yeah,
understanding that in each other and maybe planning for it
yeah.
would be a good idea.
Yeah, I think it would be fabulous because what happens is if the emo is overloaded, they're going to see sex as just another task, just
Yeah.
another thing they have to do. And that's not how we want to approach it, is it? But that's the reality of how it feels, especially, I asked you before the demographic of your age or the demographic of who your audience is, because, depending upon what group I'm speaking to, I can tailor this, but just, more, am I dealing with a bunch of young parents? Am I dealing with, older people or people going through menopause or andropause, people who are changing? So, but across the board, what I love about this theory is that it grows with us. When you look at Myers-Briggs, when you look at some of these other personality tests, they are designed to have some flexibility as we change. But with ENP, we're always going to be triggered the most by who we're in a relationship with.
Hmm.
So we might, and we're not always going to be with our equal and opposite. As a matter of fact, if we get really hurt, let's just say I'm a physical and I feel really rejected in this relationship with an emo, and we break up. They're gonna physically feel that pain. And so, in order to recover, what they're going to do is they're going to find someone more like themselves. who wants sex, who's a little bit more aggressive and assertive when it comes to sex. And that's going to be great. But then what happens is you're going to have these two dominant personalities then, trying to struggle for who's going to be the more passive and who's going to be the more aggressive in the relationship. And so what'll happen is that relationship might then not last for whatever reason. And then what they'll do is, now that they've recovered, they will go seek that emo out again. And the same happens for the emo. They're like, oh, I'm not going to get with one of those fizzes again because they just want too much from me. So what they'll do is they'll go find themselves another emo, another workaholic, another somebody who's, got all these other things going, and sex is on the bottom of the list. And what'll happen is over time they turn into just roommates. We're just not in love anymore, are we? And so, we can see why when there's this recovery time, and that's not to say that two E's and two P's cannot make it work. It's just one is always going to be playing to their subdominant traits.
So it's almost like the physical kind of keeps the erotic or the sexual juice in the relationship going over time rather than letting
this is why the E's love the P's.
Yeah.
I happen to be an emotional sexual female, but I'm not really high. I'm like lower. I'm closer to I'm probably like 40, 55, 45, something like that. Last time I kind of looked at it. And so being is that this is why we need the physicals. They tell us, look, there is more to life than work. There is more to life than making money. There's more to life than, checking that next box and doing that next thing on your list. Let's play. Let's get sensual. Let's get outside. Let's be in our bodies. And then the physicals, they love the emos because they get shit done. And they realize, oh, wait a minute, this person's going to help me have a little bit of structure in my life if I need it. And, that's not to say, I mean, my husband is a physical sexual, but he's very goal oriented, and he's very, he has, people would look at him and think he might be somewhat an E, but that's because he's in a stable relationship. If our relationship would go to shit, then he's going to get, his work would suffer because he would be so focused on the relationship falling apart. And so that's another thing to bring to the piece, is that, people come to see me in therapy when their relationship is in crisis. And that's when they go to any marriage counselor, right? Things aren't going well. And so what we look to see is, how did we get here? And when we're in crisis, our behaviors are going to get exaggerated. So the P is going to get more P and the E is going to get more E. The P is going to push forward and press forward more, and the E is going to retreat and avoid conflict more. So with therapy, we look and address, okay, how did we get here? And it's usually childhood stuff. It's usually those early rejections. It's usually those early childhood relationships with a parent or somebody, or maybe even a first relationship where the person was really controlling and dominating. And so we set these patterns of behavior that can become the triggers later.
If you were going, I think that, I don't know, if I were to guess, I would say there's probably more physicals listening to my podcast than emotionals, because they're the ones that are seeking out sexual information and how to bring that into the relationship. But if you were to give some advice to physicals, if people are self-identifying as that, as far as interacting with or meeting the emotional partner's needs, what advice would you give to the physicals?
Well, we have to look at what the core needs are. So when we're talking about an emotional, okay, there's 4 general life priorities. And for the emotional, it is career and financial security. Because if they fear losing control of their mind, body, and environment, they really need stability. So think of the emotional really needing stability. So career and financial security is going to come first. Then after that is going to be their hobbies, because that's how they decompress. And they generally tend to engage in hobbies that are, individual. So like cycling or, things like that, swimming, running. And then below that is their relationship. So this is going to be with their intimate partner or their family, their children, their friends. And then down at the bottom is sex. So if we invert that for the physicals, their life priorities, number 1 is relationship and the quality of the relationship, the connection, right? And then after that is family and friends. Then after that is their hobbies, and they tend to engage more in group, team sports. This is a generalization, but it's also, when you look at statistically, you start looking, you can see some of these personality traits come through. And then finally at the bottom is career or work. So if sex is the number 1 for the phys and it's number 4 for the emo, then what I would advise for that physical to do is recognize where the insecurity is coming from in your partner. And then how can you reassure them that you do need what you need, but I'm going to give you your space for you. So I have another story for you. So as I mentioned, I'm the E, right? My husband's the P. And I was getting ready for the Hypnothoughts conference, and I need a little bit of pressure to focus. And so it's like a couple of weeks for a thing. And so I'm like, I went to my husband. I said, look, okay, I got all my notes. I'm going to sit. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to be in my office, and I need you to not need me for anything for the next few hours. Because he's the kind of guy that's just happy if I'm sitting. I'm just happy if you sit next to me. Just sit next to me. It makes me happy. I'm like, I got shit to do. So I'm like, don't bother me for 3 hours. I gave him a nice, good, ass grab, a nice, good smoochy kiss. And I said, okay, now let me go. I got to go do my thing. So I'm sitting in there and I'm typing away. And I don't know, time goes by. All of a sudden the door creaks open to the office. My husband comes in, he goes, don't mind me. I'm just coming in to fizz you up for a minute. You just keep doing what you're doing. He comes in, he's just, fizzing me up a little bit, gives me a kiss on the neck, grabs my boob, and then he walks out. I'll just keep typing. I'm like, that's right, because I told you I got nothing for you right now. So, I'm giving you these stories because this is what we seek to look for, the communication of having that's very different than him coming in and I yell at him, what the fuck are you doing? I told you I was busy. That's the rejection. But he learned, hey, I need to give her some space. And if I am going to go to her, I know I'm not going to get everything I want in that moment.
And being able to be patient, having that
Yeah,
gap between
exactly.
I need this now and I can wait until she's ready to give it to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the opposite side, when it comes to emos, like I don't want to say the word managing, or being able to meet their physical partner's needs and understanding, it sounds like it's actually really easy to meet their needs if you're willing.
I would say it is, because what happens is the emo tends to get a little bit self-absorbed in the whole security picture and making sure that they feel secure in their body and in their environment, and that they're not feeling overly pressed or controlled. And again, I want to stress this here. I should have stressed at the very beginning. When I'm giving these examples, it's like we're going to look at the extremes. So
Mm-hmm.
when I'm talking about E and P, it's like, let's pretend it's 100% P or 100% E. But like I said, most people are, everyone's on the spectrum somewhere. So when it comes to the E meeting the physical's needs, we have to remember that they need touch, they need sex as much as they need air. So, because we can live without water and food for a while, but we can't live very long without breathing, can we?
Mm-hmm.
And so if the emo can recognize that our partner needs us to be present with them physically, it's vital for them, then that should invoke compassion and kindness and openness to say, okay, where can I put some of my needs aside to be able to meet you where you need to be met?
That's a really great point. And a great word, I like that word, is having compassion for their needs instead of, I hear so many names, people saying, oh, you're just a pervert, or oh, you're so this, you're so that, you're so needy, you're so whatever. And I'm like, this is their need. This is their core need for well-being. And I don't think it's fair to put somebody down for expressing a core need, even if you're not ready to meet it at that time. So I really like
Absolutely.
the way you shared that. So what about the whole sex when you don't feel like it thing?
So this again plays into, and I want to be really clear. This is according to Gila, because there's lots of different opinions out there, and I'm a feminist. My husband's a feminist. My son's a feminist. And my daughter. We're a family of feminists, and my perception on this is, if you understand that your partner, so whether you're male or female, but if you understand, or anything in between, you understand that your partner has a physical need. If you're looking at it as a duty, well, this is my duty, and think about like the 50s, or the whole, I shouldn't even say the 50s, a whole fucking span of lifetime, you are supposed, all these religions that put forth, you're supposed to have sex with your partner, with your husband when he demands it. It's your duty. Well, nobody wants to make sex a fucking duty, do they?
No. And that's, and men
No.
these days, I'm totally generalizing. I'm saying men, I'm saying women and stuff like that, but it could be any gender. But people, for the most part today, aren't willing to accept duty sex anymore either. It's not fulfilling. Nobody
No,
wants it
it's not.
because you've looked at your watch or looked at the calendar and said, "Oh, okay, my legs are spread. Get it over with. I've
Yeah,
done my job." Like that's not what they want. They want engagement.
exactly. And so if we look at it as duty, I would say that we're not looking at our partner with love.
Hmm.
Because if we love our partner and we see that their sexual needs are just that, a need like air, then we can have that compassion, and then it shifts the frame of it. As a hypnotist, like we're always trying to shift the way the frame of the person is seeing things. So, it's no longer a duty. It's like, I love you and I'm going to be here. I'm going to be present for you because this is how you show that you love me. Their way to come forward and get not only their physical need met, but to feel like they're close to someone. How beautiful is that?
It's
And
really
so
beautiful. Yeah.
it's no longer a need. I mean, excuse me, it's no longer a duty. It's like, I love you enough to be here for you and to be present for you. And you may not even orgasm. It may, but it's going to feel good. I mean, it's going to feel good, right? I mean, unless there's, in the absence of pain, vaginal pain, or any kind of, penile dysfunction, in the absence of that, then it's still going to feel good. It's still connection. And there are a lot of physicals out there who for whatever reason, usually it's trauma, don't know how to express themselves verbally the way they want to, so they do it with their body. And so this is according to Gila. It's like, if we can flip the script from being duty sex to, oh wow, I can see that you really need something that I can give you that's going to make you feel wonderful and loved and valued and appreciated, and in the process it's going to feel pretty good. Might not be earth shattering, but it's going to feel all right.
Yeah, something I've heard a lot from people who don't have high libidos or don't actively desire sex very often is that once they have it, once they get into it, it's great. It's just
Yeah.
getting to that point. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
the solution or a big part of the solution, getting from here to there, getting from I don't want it, how do I even get into it when I don't want it, is to change the frame. You don't have to want it. You don't have to be horny and you don't have to desire it. You just have to have the willingness to engage with love versus engage with resentment. Because if you engage with a chip on your shoulder, you're never going to get there physically. Like your body is not going to respond
Absolutely.
with arousal, and you're going to
Mhm.
go through something. He's going to feel the energy or she's going to feel the energy if you're sitting there resenting it. If you're a man, you probably won't get hard, if that's your attitude. And it will
Mhm.
really, really suck. But if you come into it with love, it will be pleasurable. Whether or not you come, doesn't matter. And
Exactly.
and afterwards, you're going to have created all of the hormones of love. So you're making love, even though you went into it not wanting it to begin with, meaning not desiring it,
So,
not being horny for sex. Instead,
yeah,
you're actively wanting to share love.
exactly. And that brings up something else. It's a good point. Is that, I like to think of, there's three kinds of sex in my marriage. And I'm sure that my marriage is like any other relationship out there, because, it is. There is the compassionate sex. It's just, I'm going to do this for you because I love you. We've just talked about that, right? We could call that compassionate sex. And then there is making love, where there's just, for whatever reason, this connect, there's it's tender, there's eye contact, it's got the candles and the lotions, and it's just all this, it's just, you're making love, right? And then there's like, oh yeah, that was like hedonistic fucking right there, and that was fan fucking tastic, so it's like this, you can have this menu of a sexual experience within your relationship. But I think because of movies and porn and just stories and just these stereotypical ideas of what sex is supposed to be, it's all penetrative, and then it's all orgasm based. And I like a good orgasm like anybody else. But the idea is, if we make that the only outcome of what we're looking for in the relationship, then that creates a lot of pressure for the emo. And pressure is the enemy of erotic energy.
Oh, like you saying that there just kind of triggered a memory for me. Back before I knew any of this, so this is a long time ago, I I was dating somebody much older than me, living with him, and he, like many men, they have their hormonal bloom in the morning, so they have the morning boners. That was the best time for them. And that was when he wanted sex. And I'm an evening person because I need to know everything's taken care of and I can just kind of relax into it. So my strategy for that was I'm open to sex as long as you don't expect it to be all about me because my partners have all been very much pleasure givers and it was all very focused on me getting off and me having lots of pleasure that made them feel validated. And I was like, I'm happy to have sex, but I probably don't want to come in the morning and don't make me do a lot of work. Like I'll be so I was like just kind of
So you
doing
know what? My husband, my husband and I have a funny. We call this dead fish. We have like these ridiculous like things that we laugh about. I'm like, is it dead fish morning? That's dead fish. I'm just gonna lay here. You just have your fun. It's just
but and
we leave her by the ocean. He's like, yeah, you're just like a dead fish I just found on the seashore. And but it's funny. And then we start laughing. And then before you know it, it's like you move beyond dead fish,
oh
right?
yeah.
But it becomes this thing. And you bring up a key point, that the pleasure givers are the physics. They want to expand the sexual experience. They want to make it last as long as they can because they're very sensually, pleasurably driven. They live for the sexual experience. And so they want to prolong it and make it as long as they can. And consequently, on the other side, the emo tends to be more climax driven. Let's just get in there, let's just get this orgasm, and then I can get back to doing my to-do list. But what that really says is that perhaps there's a possibility that the emo is intimacy avoidant, because you'll see that a lot. They even highlighted in pop culture and movies. The sex is over, the person rolls over, lights a cigarette, and gets out of bed and goes and leaves the poor physical there. Like, aren't we going to cuddle? Whether it's male or female. But what I love about this E&P and what I want your listeners to understand is that it's like when you are a kid and I still love like murder mysteries and detective stories. And so E&P is kind of like you have this special little decoder ring or this special little apparatus that helps you to decode something that nobody else really knows. Even your partner, if your partner doesn't know E&P, but you do, it's like you have this special way to decode it. Or I like to think of it as another sense ability. We have five senses and then our sixth sense. Well, what if E&P was another sense ability? A way to sense our partner and to just be in more of a fluid dance with them, to feel into the relationship in a different way.
Oh, that's really beautiful. I did want to ask you, because I know you know something about this, about erotic fantasy and the two types,
Mm.
and how erotic fantasy differs and how the experience of it differs when they're having sex and also outside of sex.
So yes, and again, I'm going to highlight that I'm a hypnotist. And so we know the power of the unconscious mind to elicit all sorts of sensory feelings just through suggestion. And fantasy is really, in my opinion, just another expression of the unconscious mind creating an active hallucination for erotic sensation. So if we think of it this way, the E&P are going to be a little bit different at times. And that is because our fantasies tend to reflect our inner world. So if the E is somebody who feels a bit more repressed, and this goes for both men and women, if the E is more repressed, then oftentimes in their fantasies, they're going to want to be more dominant. It's like if I have to be the button down, good, don't rock the boat, don't be too loud, don't have too much of an opinion, don't be too bossy. But then in their fantasies, they're the dom. They're like, I'm going to show you what's going to happen because I'm the boss now, right? And consequently, sometimes that physical who comes across, who has to restrain their sexual desire or urges or aggressions, maybe they like at some point in the fantasy to be able to act out in a way that lets them do that. So the physical is often going to have the type of the fantasy where they are a little bit more on the submissive side. And this is not like a 100% thing. I just see this. If the physical is the one that's always dominant, they are the one that has to be the boss of everybody and everything, then when they have fantasies, usually it's more of a submissive nature. And yes.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I'm just, mapping across my own client experience, and I find that the physicals very much in their fantasy play want to experience desired, being desired so much that that person is forcing them, is bossing them, is taking them, is using them for their pleasure and being wanted and desired in the way that probably they desire their partners.
I would say so, because again, if their unconscious fear is rejection,
Yeah.
that is the exact opposite. That is a
100%.
hyper attention focus. And even for people, even if we took the E and P out of it, you would see that people who grow up who have like a lower self-concept about their body or their image or even their socioeconomic status, whatever it is, if they feel in some way diminished, very often in their fantasy lives, they're going to be hyper desired.
Yeah.
They're going to be more, that's kind of what it plays into. Um, I have a good friend, and she is definitely the bossy one in the relationship with her husband. And she's, to a point, he'll push back, but she's definitely the one who sets the tone. And we were talking once about fantasies. We were on a hike and we were talking about our different fantasies. And she's like, oh yeah, I have like, rape fantasies sometimes. And I've never told anyone this. And I personally never understood rape fantasy until I started getting into this, work and everything. And I thought, God, why would anybody, want that? But when you realize that it's these women aren't fantasizing that they're brutalized. They're not fantasizing getting beaten up, getting, violently violated. They are fantasizing being forced into some sensual submission.
Mhm.
Right?
Where he's
So
doing
so again,
everything
here's
to you
this
that you want.
exactly.
Yeah.
Women on the whole are not fantasizing rape per se in the aggressive. It's more just like this concept, oh, I have to submit, And so when I was talking to my friend, I'm like, well, that makes sense to me. And she's like, whew, okay, because I've never said that. And I was kind of feeling strange about it. I'm like, no, it makes perfect sense.
Do you think that people generally want to experience their fantasies in real life?
Well, it's not a fantasy anymore once they experience it, is it? Now it's a reality. So I would say that there are some fantasies that remain in the realm of this is very erotic, but I would never really want to do it. And then there are some fantasies that we could take outside of the fantasy realm and bring it into the reality. And that's what you do, right?
Hmm.
So for example, a real common fantasy, one of the most common that I've come across with clients is having people like voyeurism, like having people watch one person or a circle of people or whatever it is. And many of these people, when we talk about it, like, oh, I would never actually want that, but it's really erotic for me to have this as a fantasy while I'm having sex. And this plays back into that desirability piece. It's usually the people who at some point felt or still feel some level of insecurity about themselves. And so it's like, look at all these people, this circle of five guys, and they're all masturbating while I'm getting off, So, but I have not met a woman yet who wants to go and do that. So
Oh,
that's not to say that.
I've met quite a few, but
Well, there you go. And that's brilliant. I think that's fantastic. But the idea is that it's some
yeah.
fantasies remain for people inside their head as a source of erotic pleasure and energy and a way to get into the sexual experience. And other people go out and live them. And I say more power to you.
I know I'm getting a little bit sideways here with the fantasies, but is there a way that you would recommend to people to help accept? Well, first of all, if your partner has fantasies that are scary to you or weird, or you're like, oh my God, that's so gross or that's so messed up or something, if you find out that they have a fantasy like that, how should you respond? If your partner tells you something that, they've been fantasizing about this or this really turns them on, what's the way to respond to that?
Well, again, I'll bring it back to being a hypnotist. Those are symbols, perhaps. Perhaps there's metaphor. if it seems really, really like when I was explaining to my husband the rape thing, he's like, his face literally went, what the fuck? Women fantasize about that? He's like, what are you talking about? And I said, no, 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 understand. It's a metaphor. The
Hmm.
rape is a metaphor for a forced submission, a permission for forced submission.
Yeah.
And so if somebody does something that our partner, if they come to us and tell us that they really want this thing and it seems weird or strange or gross, if we could stand back and say, what is the symbol of that? What does it really mean? Or I'll
And what
just
is
call
it?
someone
And
like you, a professional,
well,
and say, what the
yeah.
fuck? What do I do with this?
Well, I would also say, like you saying that, what does it really mean? I would say, don't go with your knee-jerk reaction, because a lot of people are assigning the wrong meaning to that fantasy.
Exactly.
They're thinking, oh,
Exactly.
because my partner is fantasizing about this, like, what kind of deviant are they? Are they fucked up? Are kids in danger? Like, oh my God, do I need to get, they start freaking out and applying the wrong meanings. So
Yes.
I would not do that.
I would not do that either. I,
And
I think if anything, it should be a space for conversation.
yeah,
And I will say, and more on the topic of fantasies, when I talk to, because our friend group is really open, our family is very sex positive, so we talk about all kinds of crazy shit at the dinner table, and it seems to be the general consensus with the physicals that when they are being sexual, they are focusing on the partner that they're with. They are
yes.
there with this partner and they are just in it with this partner that they're with, and it's generally the emos that are somewhere else in their head while they are here with their partner in their body. And so sometimes that can make the physicals feel really bad, if they know this, like, well, what, you don't want to be here with me? So again, the idea is, can we bring the conversations? Oh, I want to be here with you, babe. It's just, I got this other little thing, this other little voice or narrative or script in my head that's helping me to be more erotic with you in this moment. But again, this is just my experience with clients and with my friends. There's no like statistics on this.
I was just going to ask you about that um having to, or if you're the kind of person who fantasizes about other things while you're having sex with your partner, is there a better way to do it versus not do it? Is there a way that's really shitty and there's a way that's actually effective but still allows you to remain present with them?
Well, that's a tricky question because then I'm assigning more morality to
Yeah.
somebody's idea of whatever. Uh, I love the work of Esther Perel. I just love her. And, she tells us that our fantasies can tell. I'll give you a quote here. Our fantasies can tell a lot um, about the relationship, the dynamic of our couples. And she says, through fantasy, we can repair, compensate, and transform. It is the alchemy that turns a jumble of psychic ingredients into the pure gold of erotic arousal. So I would say is if we're using our fantasies in a way that are productive to the relationship, again, it's hard for me to say what's right or what's wrong. She has this wonderful notion of, we are all living under this illusion that our relationship with our partner is permanent. You get married, so it's permanent. And it's not permanent. That person could die tomorrow.
Hmm.
And long before I ever read her work, one time, because my husband's a surfer and he sometimes gets up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to go surf before work. And so there's times where he wants you go to bed with me early because you're going to stay up and walk. Okay, it's fine. I'll go to bed with you. And I know you need your good stuff. Let's go do it. And then I'll get up and watch TV again. But I remember one time, this was years ago, and it stands out to me. I was just really not in the mood. I just wasn't in the mood. But I went because I thought, oh, same all the reasons we discussed prior. And then I was laying there. I thought, what if he goes surfing tomorrow and he drowns? And this is the last time that I will remember having sex with him. What do I want it to look like? Ooh, I want it to be juicy and delicious and good. And that was like a switch that just went off and, oh, baby, we're going to make this good. So, that this idea that this illusion of permanence within our relationship can sometimes be a powerful tool for, erotic energy. And again, it's a fantasy. It's an imagining.
Are there so let's just say maybe this is not the right circumstance to consider it, but I know that ethical non-monogamy, as far as a public subject, and even
Mhm.
an appropriate, not appropriate, but one that's acceptable to talk about, is on the rise. So,
Mhm.
how would this kind of thing relate to ethical non-monogamy? I wanted to throw that in there. I do bring it up as not because I'm promoting it or pushing it, but I think it's a legitimate choice for the people that it works for.
Yes, I agree. And, people like to argue, well, those relationships don't sustain themselves. They're problematic. They fall apart. I'm like, yeah, well, so do marriages, right?
Mhm.
So there's really you can't use that as your argument. But I think people are just more open to discussing it publicly, like you're saying. I'm always looking at what is the unconscious motivation behind the behavior.
Right.
So
Behind
if
wanting it or
behind wanting it, yeah.
behind
So
wanting
if
it? Yeah.
somebody, if the unconscious behavior for wanting to be in an ethical non-monogamous relationship is that the physicals are going to get more physical, they're going to have more sex,
Hmm.
and the emos are going to have more variety because the emotionals generally need more variety. So this is why fantasy, I think, plays into a lot of their thoughts during sex, because they can switch it up, make it bring more variety into the erotic experience in their own imagination. Also, the emotional is going to be able to have multiple partners without having to give so much attention to just one.
There's a meme I
And
like to share with my partner, and it's that polyamory was made up by introverts to get rid of their extrovert partners so they could spend more time alone. I was like,
I mean, they're going to have different motivations. The
yes,
physical is
yeah.
going to love all the attention. They're going to love all the sex. They're going to love all the pleasure, the sensory experience of it. They're going to love feeling so wanted. And there's just, oh, if that person's not in the mood, I'll just go to this other one. So there's a less chance of rejection. But also the emo is going to be able to control their space.
Less chance of rejection, except in those circumstances, because this comes up all the time. I just have to throw this in there because it's kind of funny
Oh,
to me
please do.
after what you said. A super common complaint in the poly or ethical non-monogamy world is the physical finally persuades their partner to open up the relationship after some time of wanting it because they want more sex and they're horny and they have all this energy and they have all this energy for relationships. So they open up the relationships and or they open it up and they get on the dating apps or whatever wherever it is that you meet people and they don't meet anybody. And their partner immediately gets all these dates and they're like, hey, hey, what the hell? Why are you having sex? And I'm sitting here all alone when it was supposed to be for them. So I always think that's
Unintended consequences, right? We call those pesky unintended consequences. Yeah.
yeah,
So I guess I should be more precise in my description. If the physical is in a multi-party relationship that is already engaged, that's already set, then they're going to get their needs met in that way with less chance of rejection. But
yeah,
if they're in the situation that you've described, it's going to heighten their fear of rejection because now they're going to be
yeah.
afraid that they're going to lose their partner too.
And if, this is something that if you're a listener and you're idealizing polyamory or ethical non-monogamy as a way to have more sex or have more partners, just remember there's a lot more rejection that you're facing as well, because now it's not just your one partner, it's everybody else
That's
rejecting
right.
you. So you have to be ready for that. I think you have to have a really good sense of self and a really great,
Yeah.
you have to be in a good place to begin with before the discussion is even brought up. So, if you wanted to learn more about whether you were an E or a P, and then what to do about it, first of all,
Mhm.
what are the four core traits for
Yes.
both of them?
Right. So there are these four core traits, and if we give them each a 25% valuation, this is how Dr. Kappas came to his theory. Uh, they're all individual, but they come together to create a balanced score. So number one is our relationship to our physical bodies. We've talked about this already. The E's have a bit of a disconnect to them. The P's are very, very connected to them. Number two is our response to rejection. We talked about this. The P is going to feel rejection physically like pain. And they're going to want to hold on to the relationship. They're going to be more likely to want to reconcile. The E is going to feel pain when the relationship falls apart. but they will intellectualize it. It's more emotional pain. They'll intellectualize it, and then they're generally able to move on from it easier. So our response to rejection is number two. Number three is we look over our relationship history. So when I work with people for any kind of sexual issue or relationship issue, I'm looking to see what is your relationship history, and we don't go real deep into it. How old were you? How intense was the relationship? How long did it last? And who broke it off, and how did you feel at the end? And then we try to go through as quickly as we can, because then you can see, did the person go with their same type of sexual personality to recover, or did they really keep this consistent pattern of, picking partners that are more opposite to them? And then number four is family of origin, because certain ethnicities are going to lend themselves to look and be a little bit more physical or less physical. So if you think of certain ethnicities like the Latin community, the Greeks, Italians, they're very effusive. The French kiss, kiss. They're going to be. It's going to tilt it a little bit. So you can have somebody that looks really physical, but maybe they're just from a culture that expresses itself more comfortably physically, but they really are an emo. And conversely, you might have somebody from, a culture where physical and emotional expression is very reserved. And so everyone's going to look like they're the emo, but in fact, you're going to have your P's in there too. Okay. So we've got these four core traits. And then what can really skew it is if there's sexual trauma or really intense relationship trauma. Those can cause us to create defenses to behave in a way that we wouldn't ordinarily be comfortable behaving.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, when I was younger, I would have been identified and I would have self-identified as a physical, 100%, because I was all about the attention. I needed so much attention. I needed a lot of sex. Like I needed it. That was my thing. And as I got older and went through, I don't know, like 2 decades of adult healing, I would say I'm far more emotional now, and like identifying as an emotional rather than a physical.
Yeah. And this is a good point to make, because when we have to behave opposite of what our set and natural behavior is, it's really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We have shut down physicals. We have physicals who've been so rejected by their partner that they shut down. And then they might look like an emo, but they're really a shut down physical. And that's very painful for them. And conversely, we might have an emo that has to behave more physically than they need or want to, and it's very exhausting and taxing.
It's
and
really
again, this is
acting out of
yeah.
out of character or
it can be. And so, I'm also a handwriting analyst, and so I get samples from my clients, and so they always give me as big a sample as they can, so I can hear what they're saying, what they're telling me, but then their handwriting is going to also tell me how they're really behaving. And I can see these discrepancies, and I can see some of the incongruencies, and that's where the therapy starts. How do we deal with that that pain, trauma, that pain point, that problem that causes you to feel this way, so the physical can open back up, and so that the emo can take a breath.
I just wanted to give an example of a story just to really impress how much the physicals feel that rejection and how much it means to them. And this is one of many, many stories that I have about my clients. But this one gentleman, I think he was 78 when he came to see me. And he came to see me for sensual massage. So he wasn't looking for therapy. It was physical touch that he needed. And he told me that 20 years prior, he said he and his wife had not touched. They had not touched in 20 years. And the reason, even though he loved his wife, there was nothing that he wanted to do to break apart the relationship. He didn't even want to have a lover, really. He just needed physical touch. And so he was coming for a massage. And he said 20 years ago, he was in the kitchen with his wife, and he went up behind her, and he put his hands on her breasts, and she pushed his hand away. And she said, kind of in an irritable voice, she's like, "Don't touch me," or "Don't touch me like that." It was something like that. And he like snapped his hands away, and that was the last time he ever touched her.
Wow.
And I was like, didn't you talk about it? Like, he's like, no, no, she didn't want, it was like, she didn't want me, or she doesn't want me to touch her. He was so hurt. Now, I would call that rejection sensitive dysphoria. I would say that's a rather extreme response not to talk about it. But I'm sure in order for it to be that extreme, that must have been like a straw that broke something, where it had been happening over time. and they didn't have the tools or the resources to deal with it. But
Yeah,
it is so painful to
it
live
is.
in a marriage that is touchless when touch is your need.
It is.
So,
And you bring up a good point, because if this person is a physical sexual, he's probably a physical suggestible as well, which means he is very likely to take suggestion very direct and literally as his predominant form of processing. And so he took that as a very direct suggestion. Do
don't
not
touch
touch
me.
me.
Yeah.
And then it just built and built into, like you say, it becomes this dysphoria. Uh, it's important to recognize too that if his partner was the emo, and the more tense they are in their body, if they're really really tense and someone comes to touch them, it's not pleasurable.
Mm-mm.
It can feel very abrasive. And so that is something to consider too in this dynamic of E and P. If you see your E partner is super super tense, you're going to assume that touch is going to make them feel better. But it's about asking, hey, it looks like you're tense, is there something I can do for you? Maybe it's just give me space. Maybe it's like, what, actually, yes, could you rub my neck? uh, I have more than one client over the years who is a woman, who are women with breasts, and they don't like their breasts touched because of the way that they were teased, or one person in particular, their uncle and their dad thought it was funny when she was developing to pull on
Oh
her
my
little
God.
yeah, and make fun of, look at these little nubbies growing or something like that. And so she just, and it was really causing her, with her relationship, she's like, my husband loves breasts and I want him to have playtime with my boobies. And I hear this is a very very common thing. And so we don't know what was going on through this guy's wife's head at the time. It could have been a number of things, but just like you say, it's just sad that it wasn't talked about. And that's why I think communication comes down to key. And this is not anything new when we're talking about relationships functioning harmoniously. And we know it's about communication, but it's feeling safe to communicate with our partner without being judged, without being shut down, without being talked over. So, yeah, I'm
Oh,
glad you shared that story.
yeah. Well, that's actually a really common dynamic. And that complaint, that exact complaint about, the man coming up behind the woman in the kitchen and her kind of stiffening up and not wanting that touch, and him feeling rejected. I've heard that so often that I actually have it as a subject in one of my former podcasts, and I'm probably going to bring it up again, is understanding and, with this extra information, this sort of
Mm-hmm.
emo versus physical, knowing when is the right time to approach your partner. If you're a physical person and you think, oh, touch is great. Oh, you're sitting there watching her. I'm using he and her. It doesn't
Right.
matter. Okay. You're sitting and watching them move about, looking at their body, thinking, you want to go up and touch that body. And to that person who is being touched, it feels invasive. And so, especially if they're in the middle of doing something and you're interrupting what they're doing, like if they're cooking, like or
Mm-hmm.
working or something, it feels terrible. So, understanding that about your partner and then strategizing when is a good time to go up and touch. And, this is actually like a running thing that my partner and I laugh about is he pretends to give me that like side slow blinking that you give that like a dog will give or or like with a cat, like a vicious cat there, and he'll look at me like that and I'll laugh because I know he's there wanting to touch me and he's like, ooh, is she gonna welcome this or not? So it diffuses some of that, feelings of rejection on his part and feelings of annoyance on my part of being touched when I'm not ready to be touched. So again, that
Yeah.
communication, like what you've been saying, is really
Yeah.
key. Now,
We could do a whole nother
oh,
episode on sexual dysfunctions and how E&P plays, how a lot of these sexual dysfunctions outside of physical conditions, how the E&P plays into both male and female physical dysfunctions,
oh, I would
whether
love
it's
that.
erectile dysfunction or vaginismus or all these things. When you look at, as a sex therapist or a hypnotist or anybody working, when you look at sexual dysfunction through the lens of E&P, like I said, it's like the secret decoder. You just have more information, and I see it all the time with my clients. I'm like, how did you know? I'm like, well. So we could do a whole nother episode on that.
Yes, I'm going to say we are going to, so stay tuned for that. And Gila, you have
Okay.
so much knowledge and expertise in these subjects. Where can listeners learn more about you, what you offer, and what you could do for them?
So I have a website. It is quantumwaveshypnotherapy.com. You can find me on there. I've got all sorts of subjects. You can look up all the different subjects that I work with hypnosis for, and religious trauma, sexual trauma, relationship issues. It's all in there. And then I also have a fun little YouTube channel that my son is encouraging me to grow a little bit. So I've got little things I'm trying to put out there, and eventually I will make a series of shorts that describe all this E&P stuff. But if you want to know more about it in the interim, you can go to HMI College of Hypnotherapy and just do the search for E&P, and you'll get some pretty basic information there. If you look on my website under relationship strategies, I've got it pretty much dialed in, and then there's some links that you can click on for a sexual suggestibility assessment, how you're behaving in the relationship at the moment, and then also a little video you can watch from the college. But I want to just end this with saying that the most important thing that we should consider after talking about all of this is that who we're in a relationship with is going to really influence the way that we behave. So if we are in a relationship that is harmonious and things are flowing along and everybody understands each other, it's going to, obviously things are going to play out well. But if we're in a relationship with somebody who triggers us or we trigger them, really understanding that who we're in a relationship with is going to cause our dominant or subdominant traits to express themselves.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I cannot wait to speak to you again.
Okay, I look forward to it. You're fun.
You are awesome.